Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Notice that Iran has been getting very important support from Russia. Ironically, the goal of the color revolution, people power coup, mounted by the Anglo-American intelligence services in Iran, is to put in a new regime under this rather checkered character, Mousavi. You could make a case that he's the biggest mass murderer. He's done far more crimes than Ahmadinejad ever did, as far as we can see. Although maybe that wouldn't hold up under further analysis. But in any case, the goal there, of course, is to get Iran working against China, right? A new regime put in under these circumstances would very soon cut off all oil deliveries to China. I guarantee you, because that's the goal. That's the idea, to kick the Chinese out of Africa, out of the Middle East, to cut off the Chinese oil, to cut off the Chinese access to critical raw materials from Africa, from places like Zimbabwe. And anybody who deals with China becomes immediately a human rights violator in the Anglo-American lexicon. So that is the goal. But now what the effect of this is, the abortive and possibly failed color revolution, has driven the Iranians closer to Russia. It has made it much more difficult to get any conflict going there in that critical Caspian Sea region, right? The conflict across the Caspian Sea, which would be the goal of the U.S. Establishment, the soft power group around Joseph Nye, the aggressive faction of the New American Foundation, because they have now split, as we find, and in general terms, the Brzezinski Rand Corporation group, otherwise typified by the late Samuel Huntington. So very early on in the crisis, you saw Ahmadinejad going to a meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Group, meeting with Medvedev, the president of Russia, and so forth. So the Russians are also mounting a critique of color revolutions in general. That is useful. By the way, if you go to the search engines on the Internet and you find, you look for postmodern coup, the first thing you'll find is Obama, the postmodern coup, the making of a Manchurian candidate, the book that some other authors and I put together very early on in the 2008 primary campaign. So get your copy of Obama, the Postmodern Coup from Amazon or from progressivepress.com. The question of the CIA interference is beyond all doubt. Many sources have now referred to a public signing ceremony or executive order by Bush, that's Mad Dog Bush the Younger, in May of 2007, in which Mad Dog Bush the Younger announced with great fanfare and great triumphalism a $400 million project to overthrow the Iranian regime using the obvious materials, that is the social networking sites, the various kinds of media, the notion of satellite phones, of cell phones, texting, and all the rest of it. There have been repeated acts passed by Congress. Iran regime change, right? There have been all of these things. There was a big controversy during the 2007 primaries that Mrs. Clinton had voted for one of these things. You remember, the U.S. Congress is constantly meddling and interfering. And even worse than this, go back to Seymour Hersh in the New Yorker, starting, according to my count, in 2005. Seymour Hersh has been writing articles in the New Yorker about the presence of U.S. Special Forces and CIA teams inside Iran for the purpose, as he wrote, of preparing the battlefield. The question with Seymour Hersh is that he was getting these leaks, as he always does, from inside the Pentagon and other agencies, that there were these teams inside Iran. And he naturally interpreted this in the framework of preparing for a military strike on Iran, which at that time was still highly likely. You still had Cheney doing everything possible to get that going. Now I think we can see that preparing the battlefield can mean many things. It can mean preparation for an actual military strike with air attacks and some special forces teams being parachuted in to go into the underground bunker system and blow up the things you can't reach even with bunker buster bombs, or can't do that efficiently. But now there's also this other question, as the Iranian ambassador to Mexico reminds us, the fomenting of the Kurds, the fomenting of the Arabs, the Azeris, the Pashtuns, and the Baluchis through organizations like Jundallah, CIA MI6-backed organization. They're fomenting rebellion and terrorism among the Baluchis. There was a big bomb that went off during the election campaign in one of the main cities of Baluchistan. You've got this Akhvaz Liberation Front, BP Liberation Front, as we call it. They were very big in their mobilization in previous years. And then you got this MEK, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, which is an army with tanks and all kinds of heavy weapons, which are being preserved under U.S. government sponsorship. They are untouchable. They are sitting on Iraqi territory, but the hands-off sign is put there by the U.S., and they're being held ready for God knows what kind of an intervention. So the massive, systematic acts of war, violations of international law, meddling in the internal affairs of Iran is beyond all doubt. This does not depend on what Obama says from one minute to the next, whether he uses this rhetoric or that rhetoric. This is institutionalized. You've got this radio FARDA, right, FARDA television that goes in from the U.S. side, the Voice of America, and then, of course, the flagship, the BBC Persian service, the BBC Iranian service. So all of this mechanism, and it appears to be not working, although this regime is certainly shaken. It looks more like the Cedars of Lebanon, or indeed a mild version of Tiananmen, all very similar effects. It doesn't look like the Ukrainian Orange Revolution of November 2004, which brought Europe to the brink of possible war if civil war had broken out in the Ukraine and Russian troops had intervened on one side and Polish and other NATO on the other. That's where you see World War III in sight very, very quickly. Nor does it look like the Roses Revolution in Georgia, which installed the fascist madman Saakashvili, who showed his lunacy last August by undertaking a solo attack on the Russian superpower. Not wise. It's interesting. There is a real movement in Georgia of all kinds of people, many of whom I don't endorse, but for sure there is a process of demonstrations and contestation and agitation by the opposition in Georgia against Saakashvili. They have done all of the tactics really that they've learned from Saakashvili as he took power. They've been trying to use them against Saakashvili. Do they get any support in the Anglo-American media? They're fighting for liberty against a guy who is clearly an aggressor and a dictator and a madman, and he's disappearing people, he's beating people up and killing people the whole time. You can see that on Russia Today. They're the only ones who will show it to you. The Anglo-American media completely ignores this. I'm reminded of the notion by Jacques Sapir, S-A-P-I-R, the French economist, who says that the entire Western rhetoric of human rights is completely discredited because it is used with such cynical hypocrisy and double standards to justify imperialist intervention. We'll be back in a minute.